So Sam, I'm so happy we finally connected. This is pretty cool. You're shooting a cool movie that comes out. It comes out in the end of June, right?
No,
The Love in the Zion National Park.
yeah, Love in Zion National Park. It's a Hallmark romantic comedy that we shot in Utah, at Zion National Park and around there. And it's actually premiering on Saturday, May 20th. And we
Sweet.
just like 3 weeks ago. We're recording this on May 2nd, and literally is one of the fastest post productions I've ever gone through. So it's and and complicating that even more is that I'm trying to get as much work done as I can this week because on Friday I am on the what is it the fifth or the sixth. I'm leaving for Romania to host with Elvira,
Amazing.
a group of 30 people, all fans of Elvira, to visit all the Transylvanian locations where we shot our movie Elvira's Haunted Hills, which was a spoof of the Vincent Price Edgar Allan Poe movies. And we're so excited to go back there and see some of our crew people that we worked with. And in fact, our director of photography, Viorel Sergovici, is now head of the studio where we built all the sets, and they shoot Tim Burton's Wednesday there, and we're
Oh,
going to get to.
cool.
I mean, it's just going to be this amazing trip. So,
How did that get put together? Was it fans over there, like in a group? They reached
oh,
out to you and Cassandra?
they're the fans are coming. Most of them are coming from the U.S. It was a
Nice.
U.S. based tour company that does these kind of celebrity hosted tour groups around, and they approached Cassandra with this idea, and she loved it, and then they said, well, what how about Sam? What about him coming along? And I'm like, yes, oh my god, I would love to do that. So it just all worked out. It's great.
Do you ever think about that with film? Like a lot of people I interview, their work is like 70s, 80s, 90s, and still some are working today. But they never think like when you make a movie. I think because when movies were made, even in the 90s, it was going to be in the video store, and then it was out of the video store, and then people could buy it in a store or something. I don't think anybody ever envisioned like the on demand or just everything being available all the time. So
Yeah.
that's what's fascinating. Like, so you do that movie, was that late 90s film to come out in
So
2001?
got it in 2000 and it came out in 2001. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So like that's so great. 21 years later, like people are still
Are still, I know, and still discovering it. I mean, it didn't really get much of a release at all originally. It went straight. I mean, we did some midnight shows, a lot of midnight shows and stuff, trying to generate a lot of interest, but it mostly went direct to video. And the video companies weren't even really promoting it that well back then. We just kind of got screwed over at every turn. And then it just never appeared anywhere. It was never on television literally until 2 years ago. Um, Shout Factory came out with the Blu-ray, the 20th anniversary Blu-ray. Um, it suddenly got picked up by Tubi, and is now streaming, and you can sort of see it now. But for the longest time, if you didn't happen to have a DVD of it or something, you would never have seen it. And so I'm finding that it's almost like a new film in a way
yeah.
because are discovering it right and left that had never even knew it existed. So yeah, it's pretty cool. I'm really, really thrilled about it. And the movie also stars, in addition to Elvira, of course, it also stars Richard O'Brien, who was Riff Raff in Rocky Horror Picture Show. And
Yeah.
most people realize that he wrote Rocky Horror. He wrote the music, lyrics, the play, the screenplay of the movie, everything. He's Mr. Rocky Horror. And he knew all the Vincent Price movies that we were spoofing inside and out, just like we did. And so it was just this labor of love that was fantastic. We just had so much fun making it. I think of it as, the way that Mel Brooks made Young Frankenstein as a love letter to the Universal horror movies.
Yeah.
That's what it is to Vincent Price and to those Edgar Allan Poe films. And there is a pit and a pendulum. So
That's awesome, Sam. So obviously you have your book that people are loving, and I love your awards you give out on Facebook for like the 50th and the 69th, and that's really fun.
I do my Facebook very tongue in cheek. Anybody out there should try to to friend me on Facebook, is I just try to have fun and keep it all upbeat and positive. And this one of my followers said 2 or 3 years ago, he said, you need a name for your followers, kind of like, Lady Gaga has the Little Monsters and had the Deadheads, and my favorite one was always Benedict Cumberbatch had the Cumber Bitches. And so I just thought, okay, well, I'm not exactly a celebrity, but I can be my own mind and have fun with this in a tongue-in-cheek way, and let's figure out a name for my followers. So I put it out there that people should throw me suggestions and see what I like. And this one guy suggested Sandwiches.
Sandwiches, okay.
And spelling witches as Witches because sections. And I thought that was the thing. And it rhymed with Cumber Bitches. So I was like, okay. So now I call my followers Sandwiches, and I give out awards for when we get to certain levels of likes. So if we get to 50, I'll give out an award, and the prize is bragging rights.
Nice.
And then I do funny numbers like 69. We all 169. If something is really popular and gets up to 666, I give a free. So
that's awesome.
All good fun, and yeah, you got to visit my page. But
I'll make sure I'll put the link in for people that are listening to check it out. But so Sam, in your beginnings, obviously the book, which I think it's really cool that you're donating any of the proceeds to the Trevor Project. That's amazing.
To the Trevor Project, which is an LGBTQ plus organization that benefits LGBTQ youth.
Yeah, no, and that's key because kids, even in a day and age, you think it seems like there was a point that things were getting better, but now I think things are getting worse. I don't know.
Way worse, and kids especially are having just under attack. So it's really important, and I'm giving 100% of the profits to the Trevor Project. Things we're giving a portion of the profits, which means I'm giving everything, and so yes, it's a great cause, and the book is available in hardback, paperback, and audiobook, which is only 21 hours.
With you? Are you reading it?
Reading it, and also it's a collection of interviews I did with horror royalty back in the 70s when I used to publish a fanzine on horror films called Bizarre. And so this book started out as a collection of 35 interviews that I did way back then with people like Vincent Price, Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, Ingrid Pitt, Donald Pleasance, all these greats. But as I also had to write introductions to each one explaining how I bamboozled this interview. And those started to get really funny, and they're often sometimes more interesting than the interviews themselves. And then I realized, well, I've got to set this up. So I need some biographical chapters of my crazy monster kid childhood that led up to horror magazines. So the book ended up being half memoir, a coming of age memoir of my crazy closeted gay youth being a huge fan of horror films. And then the other half is the collection of interviews. So for the audiobook, every person who was still alive who I interviewed I convinced them to come in and record their answers. This is people like Jane Seymour.
Oh my God, yes.
Linda Hayden, Madeline Smith, Chloe Franks, who was the little girl in House That Dripped Blood that had the voodoo doll that killed Christopher. She's, she has never appeared in fandom or conventions or anything. And I found her and got her to come in. And for the people who had passed away, like Diana Rigg and all these incredible actors, I had other actors do their voice, not do impressions, but just do the answers for them. And Juliette Mills of the great Mills dynasty, her father was Sir John Mills and her sister was Haley Mills. She does Diana Rigg's voice, and she was happy to do it. She knew Diana Rigg. They actually starred in a play together on the London stage in the 60s. And Her husband Maxwell Caulfield does some voices of like
Oh,
Brown.
Maxwell. Okay. You know him
And
well. You worked with
yeah,
him a bunch in the early 90s. Yeah.
several of my films and stuff. So it just was the most fun project to do. Now I got Elvira to write the foreword to the book, and of course she voices her foreword. And then another good friend of mine, Julie Brown, the funny Julie Brown with red
Downtown
hair.
Julie Brown.
Oh, people get all confused about it. They were both on MTV at the same time. Downtown Julie Brown is the African British um, VJ on
Yeah.
MTV, and they made her add downtown to her name because they were already using redheaded Julie Brown, and who had a show on MTV called Just Say Julie, and she wrote and starred in Earth Girls Are Easy, and she
Oh,
had
okay.
a novelty song called The Homecoming Queen's Got a Gun, and she was in Clueless and all these other great things. And anyway, Julie's a great friend, and she agreed to read my little bio at the end. And anyway, it's a great book, but you really need both to get the full experience. The book itself is 350 pages, 600 photographs, the hilarious cartoons that I had a cartoonist friend of mine do to depict some of the funnier moments of me bamboozling these interviews. And it's just the most fun ever. And it's nominated for a Rondo Award for Best Book of the Year. And they're announcing the awards on Thursday night. I'm on pins and needles, counting every second, hoping and praying, fingers, toes, and eyes
Yes.
crossed.
Yes. That's cool. So you're what, like teenager when you're doing the fanzine
Yeah.
in the 70s?
I went to England twice in 74 and 75 at the age of 17 and 18. And just, I mean, you would not have believed it. I was already corresponding with these people. I was a total groupie and super fan. And I already conducted an interview with Christopher Lee through the May questionnaire. But when I finally got my parents to agree to send me to England as a high school graduation present, I immediately wrote to Christopher Lee and said, I'm coming. I want to meet you in person. And he said yes. And he invited me to lunch at Pinewood Studios, where he was filming a little film called The Man with the Golden Gun, which was the James Bond film in which he plays the man with the golden gun. He was the main villain. And I spent the day. After we did the interview at lunch, he invited me back to the set, and I watched them shoot a James Bond movie for half a day with Roger Moore and Britt Eklund and Maud Adams and Hervé Villachez. And it was crazy. And at the end of the day, I shared a Rolls-Royce limo back to London with Christopher Lee and Hervé Villachez. Hervé was, and now people don't know, Hervé is the little guy from Fantasy Island.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And he was already 10 sheets to the wind. And he played Christopher Lee's sort of sidekick, and was really the basis of, in the Austin Powers movies, the little mini-me guy was really was a spoof of Hervé Villachez in The Man with the Golden Gun. Anyway, Hervé started regaling us with stories about all the prostitutes he'd hired since he'd been in, and going into great detail. Now, heavy lisp, and he kept. I hope. Are we okay to say some words on this?
Yeah. Any words, Sam.
Well, he kept pronouncing pussy as pussy. It was peppered like 10 times in every sentence, and Christopher Lee started to laugh every time. And I started to laugh, and we were absolutely in hysterics in this car. And, for me, growing up with Christopher Lee as Count Dracula, very stern and very serious all the time, to see Christopher Lee in hysterics doubled over was the most hilarious thing ever. And crazy. And then, you'd think that would be enough for one day. No, that night I went to see Diana Rigg on stage in Pygmalion on the West End. Pygmalion being, the play that My Fair Lady was based on. And so she's playing Eliza Doolittle, and I'm excited to see that because I'm a huge fan of her from the Avengers TV series where she played Emma Peel, and the James Bond movie on Her Majesty's Secret Service, but mostly because she played Vincent Price's daughter in Theater of Blood. And So I'm sitting there waiting for the show to begin. I'm hoping that after the show, I'll go back, I'll go to the stage door and maybe try to meet her and try to corner her for an interview. Well, I sitting there waiting in my seat, and I hear this very familiar laugh behind me. I turn around. It's fucking Vincent Price, who I've already met 2 or 3 times, even though I'm 17. And before I can open my mouth, he says, "Sam, what are you doing here?" And
Wow.
believe he recognized me. I couldn't believe he remembered my name. And he, of course, I explained, that I was dying to meet Diana. And he said, "Well, you're coming backstage afterwards." And he took me backstage and introduced me. And she granted an interview for the magazine. And it was just, I mean, that was just one day. That's one.
Oh man, where'd you grow up, Sam? Were you out in California? Is that how you ran into Vincent Price 2 or 3 times?
I grew up in Asheville, North Carolina. I was
Oh,
just
okay.
in the mountains, and my dad was owned movie theaters, and my grandfather was also in the and for competing chains. And so I got into free to every single movie theater in town. And and this is back in the days before home entertainment and video or anything. So if to be able to go see movies multiple times was pretty golden.
Yeah.
And I spoiled as a kid. And it was just my playground. And so at the age of 8, my dad took the whole family on a cross country road trip to California, to Disneyland, and to see all the sights going out west, like the Grand Canyon or whatever. And because of his connections in the movie business, we got a VIP tour at Warner Brothers. Well, at age 8, I walked onto the set of The Great Race, directed by Blake Edwards, and they were shooting, just a little iceberg sequence in a tank of water with wind machines and wave machines, and with 2 antique cars on the iceberg, as well as Natalie Wood, Jack Lemmon, Tony Curtis, and Peter Falk, all on this iceberg. And I'm watching them do this, and the eyes literally just popped right out of my head that moment that I decided I wanted to direct movies. And the same day, I also got to watch some shooting of Two on a Guillotine, which I was also very excited about because it was more of a horror movie. And I mean, it just, it was unbelievable. So from that day forward, I took the 8 millimeter home movie camera out of my dad's hands and never gave it back. Started making my own little movies, and then that's what I wanted to do. But when I got to my teens, I was such a fan of horror films. And because of my dad, I had access to get posters and photographs and press books and all this cool material that I could use and create a fanzine. So I created the Fanzine Bazaar, which I did one a year. It was an annual publication that I would do during summer break from school. And they were pretty mad. It grew each time. It grew bigger and bigger. But by issue 3, it was like 100 pages, and it was pretty slick, and it had a full color cover of Michael Sarrazin as the creature from Frankenstein: The True Story, and I got my parents to send me to London, where I got all these incredible interviews, and the magazine took off, and it was being sold at cinema shops and bookshops like Larry Edmunds in Hollywood, which is still here. They actually carried it way back in the day. And so there was a store in New York called Cinemabilia. There was a place in London. There was a place in Australia. And those were meccas that any film buff who would go to those cities as a tourist even knew about those stores, and they would instantly go there. And my magazine got picked up and seen by so many people all over the world. It was crazy. And it got seen by a lot of major directors. Francis Ford Coppola bought copies of it.
Oh my God.
Spielberg, William Friedkin, De Palma, who I later worked for.
Yeah.
They all knew about this publication. And so my book was basically, I was like, people wanted me to just reprint the issues. And I'm like, half of those issues are my really early review of horror movies, and they're so embarrassing and so badly written that I just couldn't bear to embarrassing stuff out there again. But the interviews were great time capsules. They really were. And these actors were still at the height of their career.
Oh
You know, this
yeah.
wasn't a 20 years later looking back kind of interview where they had honed their answers and whitewashed them and whatever. They were raw and unfiltered. And I guess in the early 70s, I guess publicists had not gotten a hold of their clients to tell them that they bad shit about their colleagues, because they some bad shit about their colleagues. At
Oh
least they
man.
know. Um, and Donald Pleasance is going on and on about how he doesn't want to be typecast in horror films and he's never going to do a horror film again. Of course, this was 2 years before Halloween.
Yeah,
And it's so funny to read them now. And so, yeah, I'm just really excited to have it out there again.
no, that's cool. You did that. No, I had to order it. I love obviously interviews. I love talking to people, and I love reading interview. Like I don't know if you ever saw what's his name, the director Judd Apatow was
Yeah,
interviewing people when he was like 15, 16, because his
really.
mom was a waitress at a comedy club in Long Island. So he used to get people, and I have the book somewhere, but in one of the interviews, he interviewed Seinfeld like 3 or 4 different times. One time he interviewed him, he sort of lied to him. He said he was from a radio station, and then I think it was all through like letters, and they set it up, and everything was going. And he goes, "What radio station is this again?" And it was like a high school radio station. So he was like 14 years old, was going through puberty. His voice was cracking, but no, I got to pick that book out. So Sam, so from there, at the age of 8, obviously seeing that,
Yeah.
seeing movie making, which is like the greatest thing when you watch a movie and you get the opportunity, like you saw in your right in front of your eyes, when you watch like behind the scenes of how scenes are made, and then you watch the scene again, you like this more appreciation of it. Obviously, as a director, you see it through the lens, and then you see it like the final cut. So, what was your first steps to follow that dream? Like to take that. Obviously, you're making your own home movies, but did you go to school? Did you just go out to Cali?
Well, I did. I went to film school at the University of South Carolina, the other
Okay.
U.S. East,
The others, yes.
and mainly because my dad also had theaters in Columbia, South Carolina, and I could work promoting movies. I would do all the newspaper ads and all that kind of stuff. So I was earning a living while I was going to school. Yeah, I was nepotism, of course, but I did a really good job, and um, I was passionate about it. I just loved working for the movie theaters and everything. It was so fantastic. But I also on campus I ran a movie theater, the campus movie theater, where we had a film program that ran 365 days a year. We would run art house movies during the week for free, and on the weekends we would charge $1 and we would show a little bit more commercial movies. And with the money that we made on the weekends, it was a 300-seat theater, we could afford to finance the free movies all week and then even have a little left over. Well, with that leftover, we occasionally would put on some kind of special event. And in 1975, I had become obsessed with Brian De Palma. I had seen Sisters, which was a big Hitchcockian kind of thriller, and with music by Bernard Herrmann, and just incredible with Margot Kidder. And then I had seen Phantom of the Paradise, which completely blew me away, and which was a rock and roll comedy take on Phantom of the Opera, modern day. And so with those two films, I'm like, we are having a Brian De Palma Film Festival. Now, he wasn't really all that well known other than those films in those days. And those films had not done very well at the box office. So I was like, I just want to try to get in touch with him and see if he'd come. So I looked in, my father had all the trade journals, and I looked in Hollywood Reporter and Variety to see what was going on in the production charts. And there was a listing for a film called Carrie that was in pre-production, and it was casting in Hollywood. And there was a phone number for the casting office. So cold called that number. They put it right on the phone. I told him what we're doing, and he said, "Listen, I live in New York. I'm broke. I really need some stuff in my apartment. If you can give me the airfare to come from LA to South Carolina, then to New York for the weekend and back to LA, I'll come for the triangle there." And I said, done. And we had enough money in our coffers to pay for it. Now, this, I should mention, this casting sessions going on for Carrie turned out to be perhaps the most influential casting sessions in the history of Hollywood, because Brian De Palma and George Lucas were sitting together at a table reading every young actor in town for Carrie and Star Wars. Every person who entered that room read a scene from both movies, and then if they found somebody that they loved, they would fight over who was going to get them. But I mean, Carrie Fisher read for Carrie and Star Wars. I mean, it was nuts.
Wow.
And of course, at the time, but later found that out. And so anyway, De Palma comes to South Carolina. We're having a big midnight showing of Phantom of the Paradise. Everybody to come in costume. He's judging the best costume. We're giving prizes. It's 300 people, totally sold out. And the movie starts and there's no sound. And I run up to the projection booth. The sound bulb had burned out, and it's now midnight in Columbia, South Carolina. There's no place to get another bulb. We had to cancel the screening, send it home. I felt like, okay, all the goodwill that I have built up with De Palma up to this moment, it just got flushed down the drain. But this will tell you what a sardonic sense of humor kind of guy he is. He thought it was absolutely hilarious. And it actually, in retrospect, kind of made me a little more memorable to him, because I ended up, I mean, I was still in school, but between my junior and senior year, I called him up and I knew he was doing his next film because, of course, Carrie then opened and became this huge breakthrough hit. And now he's like A-list director in Hollywood. And he was doing a big budget 20th Century Fox movie called The Fury, which was another telekinesis thriller and this was with Kirk Douglas and John Cassavetes and all these major stars. And I called him up and said, could I come to Chicago where you guys are shooting during my summer break and work on it? And he said, sure. So I went up and worked on that. And I got an assignment from Cine Fantastique magazine because I was no longer doing my fanzine anymore, to do a journal on the making of the film, and interviewed everybody for it, including the editor, Paul Hirsch, who edited Star Wars, and John Williams, who might have heard of him. He did the score. And I mean, it was everybody, all A-list all the way. And so then I go finish my senior year, and now De Palma calls me in May as I'm about to graduate. Says, I'm going to be doing this low budget film this summer of comedy called Home Movies. Kirk Douglas is going to star in it. It's being financed by Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, me. We're all putting money in. And do you want to come up and work on it? I'm like, yeah, I'm graduating. Yeah, yes. So I jumped on the plane after my last exam, didn't even go to my graduation ceremony. Who cared at that point? And I thought I was just going to be a production assistant like I was on The Fury. And he greets me with the news that I am the associate producer and production manager. And he just threw me into the deep end to see if I could swim. And I did okay. And he hired me to be his assistant and sort of head of his two-person production company, me and him, where I'd be a script reader and do reports and, that kind of thing. And it was just, that was right out of film school. So that's how I got started in the business.
Wow.
I worked as his assistant on Dress to Kill, and then for a year on Blowout before, getting it developed and ready for shooting. And then he recommended that I produce a low budget film that he was advising, called The First Time. And it was unfortunately shooting at the same time Blowout was. So I didn't get to actually work on the shoot of Blowout, but ended up, instead of being De Palma's assistant on Blowout, I was the sole producer on this film that New Line Cinema ended up releasing, which, again, just sort of moved me up the ladder a little bit. And then, of course, my goal was to direct, and I did a short film. I used De Palma's editing room, which he gave me for free use between projects. And one of the actors in it was Bill Finley, who had played the Phantom of the Paradise. I was so incredibly thrilled. And Wayne Knight from Seinfeld, who played Newman on Seinfeld. This really cool cast.
Wow,
And
nice. That's early Wayne Knight. That's probably I couldn't tell you the first time I saw him, but 85, he must have been very green.
It was very early Wayne Knight. And of course he was in Jurassic Park and Basic Interrogation Scene and everything. But anyway, that film it got selected for Sundance. It got a big splash there, and then I did it in 35 millimeter. I wasn't playing around with that. I wanted this to be my card, and I managed to get it booked theatrically in Los Angeles with Martin Scorsese's After Hours, and in New York with John Boorman's Emerald Forest, and it opened and got a really good review in the New York Times by Janet Maslin. And that sort of got the ball rolling for me as a director. And I got my first feature film off the ground called Guilty as Charged with Rod Steiger and Lauren Hutton and Heather Graham, Isaac Hayes, Zelda Rubinstein. And it was a horror film about this nutcase who kidnaps murderers who've gotten off. And he puts them in his own dungeon and fries them on his own.
It's good. I watched it before we were going to chat like a few months ago. I went through a bunch of your movies, and that was the first one I watched. Yeah, that was cool. No, you worked with Rod a few times, because another one I watched yesterday, which I got to tell you, I think it's the coolest concept, and I don't know if it's ever been done before or ever since, but the whole concept of Out There, I think, is like such a cool concept that he buys this little brownie because my wife takes photos and we collect like old cameras. And that's such a cool concept that everybody's like, no, yeah. And Rod Steiger in that movie is so good. Like,
I got back and play a part in that too. This guy finds an old camera at a yard sale, and it's got film in it that hasn't been developed. He develops it, and aliens with a spaceship, and he's like, is this real? Is somebody making a movie? What's going on? And so he has to investigate it, and lo and behold, maybe it is real. And and it's comedic, but it's a really cool kind of mystery thriller sort of thing. And everybody's in that movie. Bill Campbell from The Rocketeer is the lead.
He's great. Yeah.
Who does the voice of the mom on Family Guy is it Family Guy or American Dad? One of those two. And she's the female lead. But then we also have Billy Bob Thornton, just before he went off to do Sling Blade and win an Oscar. And Rod Steiger, Oscar winner. Bobcat Goldthwait, Julie Brown, who we talked about before. June Lockhart from Lost in Space, Carl Stryken, who is Lurch in the Addams Family movies and the Giant on Twin Peaks. And
Oblivion, and the guy in Oblivion.
Yes. And I mean, just everybody's in this movie. And Bill Campbell was still dating Jennifer Connelly they met making The Rocketeer. And by then, Jennifer Connelly was, turning into a really major actress, and of course, Oscar winner and everything. And she would visit him on set all the time. And so one day, have enough extras at the grocery store scene where he was in line with Julie Brown. And I said, Jennifer, come on, we'll be a couple in line. So if you don't blink, you can see the two of us in line at the grocery store with no lines or anything. We're just there as background.
Oh my God, I got to look that up. No, because I watched that. I watched Oblivion, which I loved.
Oh,
and
great.
I think Billy Campbell's great. I don't know if he's still acting. I didn't click on his IMDb, but Rocketeer. And then, I really liked Oblivion too.
Yeah, the two Oblivion films are really fun. We shot them back to back in Romania. There's cowboys and aliens kind of movies. And And yeah, Cowboys and Aliens really stole a lot from us, actually, including an aliens phrase was on our poster. It was the copy line on our poster. And then Tom Cruise stole our title, Oblivion, for one of his sci-fi movies.
Yes, he did.
But yeah, we just keep getting ripped off. But our film starred well, people like Julie Newmar, the original Catwoman series. She plays a feline alien who runs the saloon in the distant planet in the future. And she's wearing, leopard cat suit and everything is perfect. And they're doing all these women. And George Takei from Star Trek, he plays the town drunk. And I wanted to have all kinds of little Star Trek nods. And
that was on you? That was your choice, the Jim Beam? I love that.
He comes out of the bar and he's drunk and he's got a bottle of Beam and he goes, Jim, beam me up, and takes a big swig. And then we had Isaac Hayes, who was an Oscar winner for the theme from Shaft and had been and acted in Escape from New York, and I just loved him to death. And we had Maxwell Caulfield was in part 2 in Oblivion 2. We had Meg Foster. We had again Carl Stryken from Addams Family and Twin Peaks. God, just again an amazing cast and so much fun to make. Oh my God, we built that Western town in Romania from the ground up. It was literally a cornfield when I arrived.
Wow.
And it's still there. It's in the back lot now of the studio that got built around it, called Castell Films. And Kevin Costner's Hatfields and the McCoys use that Western Town Street on their series. It pops up all the time. I'm like, damn, this is so cool. It lives on.
That's cool. That'd be cool if they left Miss Kitty's on the place.
I wish they did. They painted name on one of the buildings, and it actually showed up in a couple of other things that were painted over it. But I think that's gone.
No, it was really good. I was like joking with my buddy. I was like, man, if I saw this as a kid, I probably want a Jackie Swanson poster.
Yeah,
in that movie. I don't know what else she was in, but she was like stunning. Like you couldn't take your eyes off her. She had like this look.
Yeah. And Musetta Vander played this dominatrix sort of, evil henchman of Red Eye in it, played by Andrew Diboff. And she went on to do the exact same character in the Wild Wild West with where she was Kenneth Branagh's,
Oh, that's who I'm talking about. The girl that was wearing the leather and the whip. That's who you mean? Okay, I had the names mixed up. Okay, her.
Yes, really, really beautiful, but literally she played. I mean, literally the same character, including in the Wild Wild West. They just stole it and her from our movie, and she learned for our movie. She hired the person who taught Michelle Pfeiffer how to use it when she played Catwoman to teach her whip wielding stuff for Oblivion. So, I mean, she really came prepared. It was amazing.
That's really cool. I love that. Like we were talking behind the scene things. If you ever see the behind the scene moment of her doing that, Michelle Pfeiffer, she did it like, I don't know if it was the first try, but they show the scene that she did it. And as soon as she hit the last one, everyone erupts, like everybody in the crowd, because it was all one take. Very cool, man.
I've got to watch that again. I did see it years and years ago, but it's all really cool. So
I just think it's cool about those movies, especially like Full Moon and I guess Roger Corman too. You have these collection of these people that have these, they're not like the it people at that time, but it's still really cool to see those people share a scene, like to see, Catwoman and George Takei and Isaac Hayes. Like it's really neat in a movie to see that.
I love that. And even back then when we were making them, I tried to, I had a much bigger hand in casting back then than they let me now on my Hallmark and Lifetime movies. Everything is kind of by committee and, just too many cooks in the kitchen when it comes to casting. Not that anybody's bad. It's just, I want iconic people that I love from, movies and TV shows, even if they might be considered has-beens or, whatever. I just think it's the coolest thing. And I would always try to cast every role that I possibly could with somebody recognizable. And I did it on those first few movies that I did back in the 90s. And it was just great fun. I mean, I did a film called Acting on Impulse.
I gotta watch that. It's on my list. I gotta find it because the cast is unbelievable. The main girl in it, I forget her name, but she's in a ton of stuff.
Nancy Allen, of course, from my she's in it. Linda Fiorentino, who was in the Scorsese film and Men in Black and everything. C. Thomas Howell, Zelda Rubinstein again from Poltergeist, Isaac Hayes again. I had Paul Bartel and Mary Warnoff, both from Eating Raoul, which is one of my favorite dark comedies. Had Dick Sargent from Bewitched, his very last film role. I had, I ran into Peter Lupas from the original Mission Impossible series at Jack in a Box having a burger. And I was like, Peter Lupas, oh my God, will you come be in my movie? And he did. He came out.
Holy shit.
And it was just
Ralph Malph, Don Most was in that movie.
Happy Days. I mean, I'm sure I'm forgetting people. Oh, Cassandra Peterson. First time I worked with Elvira was in that movie. I asked her to do not as Elvira, but as this bouncer at a country western bar. And she wears this blonde wig that had belonged to Daryl Hannah and does kind of a Dolly Parton thing. And she cards Nancy Allen and Linda Fiorentino and C. Thomas Howell as they're going into this country western bar. I mean, just at every turn, there was somebody else that you would recognize. And just so much fun. And I even had... oh God, now I can't think of his name, but there was this old timer who was in his 90s, and he'd been in everything from, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington to I Love Lucy to everything. He has like 400 credits, and we even got him to do a cameo in it. It was wild, just wild.
No, it's cool because obviously growing up with with movie in your blood with your being in the family business, that you like, obviously you're directing a movie, you have a job to do, but it's like, I want to enjoy all these people because I know, because you're that person. I'm sure you do that today. You watch something and you're like, hey, what's that guy from? Or what's that girl from? Because that's what movies are. So it's so cool watching like those Oblivion movies and you're like, hey, I know that person. What else are they from? And it's neat.
Yeah. It's, and especially if there's a little bit of tongue-in-cheek humor already, a really serious drama, you may not, having this kind of what you might call stunt casting might take you out of it for a beat, but when it's a little tongue-in-cheek, I just love the baggage that they bring to the table, that they're, as soon as they come on the screen, the viewer is like, oh yeah, I can't wait to see this person again. And I just find it really fun, and I wish I could do it more often.
No. It just, maybe they just don't let that happen because they don't never do that on those Hallmark movies. There's no like random. They do
and have these older TV stars and things like that play one role or two role or play the boss or something, but they don't have enough fun with it. I would be in there trying to get them to play every single role.
And then obviously Elvira, just before that, I talked with Jonathan Mangum and you directed a Strip Mall, a couple episodes of Strip Mall. He thought that was his ticket. He was like, man, I got on a series. This is it. There's a lot of cool people on that series. I don't know if it was just the time it was on or.
Yeah, but and Strip Mall, I was trying to tell you who Julie Brown was. She created and starred in Strip Mall.
Okay.
That's first for Comedy Central. And but it has, her husband was played by Jim O'Hare, who later played Jerry and Stella Stevens plays his mother, and she was Poseidon Adventure. She just recently passed away, unfortunately. And we also had from Happy Days. I mean, no, Laverne and Shirley. Cindy Williams, who just passed
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
He was unbelievably funny, and again, just an amazing cast of people.
Tim Bagley, who's I think is one of those underrated guys who, whenever he shows up at something, he is just great.
And also, yeah, Tim Bagley is fabulous. Uh, and then Maxwell Caulfield was in it. That's and I'd already worked with Maxwell in the second Oblivion film, so that was a nice reunion for us, and it was just again really fun. And I did. There were 2 seasons of Strip Mall. It on Comedy Central kind of got screwed up because they aired it on the night right after the Man's show, and it was not the same kind of audience or anything. And it was the same time that they were running Strangers with Candy on another night, and we're like, why are we not with Strangers with Candy? That would be
yeah.
And so it never really took off in a big way, but it did get a second season. I directed a few episodes in the first season, and then I went off to Romania to do Elvira's Haunted Hills, and I came right back and did a couple more episodes for the next season of Strip Mall. But it was great fun, and you can get episodes of it if you go on Julie Brown's website. She sells DVDs or not sure if they're Blu-rays or not, maybe just DVDs of the whole series. So it's really worth checking out.
Oh, cool. I'll put that in there. No, it's pretty neat. And people don't think about that. Like maybe when I was younger or before I started interviewing people that worked on TV, like just the whole politics and really matters, like the show leading up to you. And then I love that Dana Carvey documentary about the Dana Carvey show, like how they didn't even realize what Home Improvement was. They thought it was just a family show. But one of the episodes was like Brad was like his buddy got caught with heroin, and they're like, holy shit, that's leading into him with the cat nipples as Bill Clinton to start the show. So it matters what leads in to what people are gonna, because they'll be like, oh, this is totally different. I don't want to see this,
Exactly. Well, and then it got silly because there were some like 3 teenage boy characters in Strip Mall, and because that was kind of the audience for the Man show, the network came to Julie Brown and said, all right, we really need to push that audience, and you need to, like, in and out of every commercial, we need to end with a scene with the teenage boys, and when we come from a commercial, we have to, it was that kind of bullshit going on. Like, oh my God, please, put us on another day.
yeah. So how'd you connect with to do Elvira's Haunted Hills? Was it just knowing Cassandra from then, or how'd that come about?
What happened? I was a huge fan of Elvira in the 80s, watched her hosting gigs, and then watched her first movie, Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, which was late 80s, and loved that and just thought she was the funniest thing. And when I moved to Los Angeles, I had lived in New York when I was working for De Palma and lived there for about 12 years. But it kind of goes back to even when I was in college. Sorry to make this story too complicated, but there was a gay friend of mine at the University of South Carolina named Lanier Laney. He went to New York and ended up becoming a writer on Saturday Night Live, which was so impressive. I was like, oh my God, the coolest thing. And his boyfriend was Terry Sweeney, who became the first openly gay cast member of Saturday Night Live. But they started out as writers behind the scenes, and then Terry got bumped up to actually be on the show as a regular. And if you watch the show back in the 80s, he was most famous for always playing Nancy Reagan in drag, and was hilarious. And it was a really breakthrough season for, having an LGBTQ out character on there. And it was also the same year that Denitra Vance was on there, and she was the first open lesbian who was on Saturday Night Live. And I became friends with Denitra, and I became friends with Terry, and through Lanier, and I would go to tapings, and we'd all hang out, and it was great. Okay, so flash forward to I've now moved out to Los Angeles. Now Terry and Lanier have moved to LA, and they're working as writers on Mad TV. Well, they had a party and they invited me to come. Well, because they're Saturday Night Live and Mad TV, they're like royalty among all the comedians of show business. And, their party was just everywhere you turned. It was another famous comic actor or member of Saturday Night Live or cast member of Mad TV or whatever. I'm just like on cloud nine. And I look in the corner and there's Cassandra Peterson. And I'm like, holy shit. And I run over to Terry and Lanier and say, you have to introduce me. And they take me over and they tell her that I'm the director of a new film called Guilty as Charged. And she went, oh, I just saw Guilty as Charged at the theater and I loved it. And in fact, I've been wanting to meet you because if I ever do another Elvira film, I want to consider you to be a director. And I was like, oh my God, no way. So we became friends and I cast her in this little cameo and Acting on Impulse just a few months later. And she invited me to come to the taping of her Elvira pilot that never, it was for CBS, but it never got off, never got picked up for series. But it was really fun to see a sitcom, 3-camera sitcom with a live audience of Elvira. And the whole concept was she and Catherine Hellman, remember her from Brazil? She was on Soap, but she was on Brazil where they stretch her.
Yeah.
That's Catherine Hellman. The two of them played aunts with magical, they were witches, magic powers. And it's Elvira, she's dressed as Elvira and playing Elvira, and her sister played by Catherine Hellman, and they have a niece who lives with them who has magic powers, and they're in suburbia, kind of like bewitched and trying to, not let people on to the fact that they have all these powers. Well, of course, the whole concept got completely stolen for the Teenage Witch. And they just switched the focus from one of the aunts to the teenage Sabrina, but it was the exact same concept. And Sandra has never gotten over it, and I don't blame her because it was just crazy how they treated her, and then turned it down and then stole the idea.
My God!
But at any rate, we just became social friends, and finally, several years later, she called me up and she said, "Listen, we've tried to get another Elvira film off the ground everywhere. Nobody wants to do it. So my husband and I have decided we're going to self-finance it. We're mortgaging our house and everything. I always told you that I wanted to consider you to direct. And so we are interviewing several directors, but come up to the house and let's talk about it." So I went up there and she hands me the script and she goes, "This is Elvira's Haunted Hills. It's a spoof of the Vincent Price, Edgar Allan Poe movies. How are you real familiar with those?" And I go, "This is Vincent Price's monologue from the climax of Fit in the Bed. Do you know where you are, Bartolome? You are about to enter hell, the netherworld, the infernal region, the abode of the damned, the place of torment, Gehenna, Naraka, the pit, and the pendulum, the razor edge. Thus the condition of man, bound on an island from which he can never or hope to escape, surrounded by the waiting pit of hell, which must destroy him finally." And she cocked her head, looked at me like I was crazy, and said, "You're hired." And that's literally how I got those. And it was the most fun I've ever had making a movie. It takes place in the 1800s in this castle. She wanted to go to Romania and she'd already been there to tour castles to try to find the right castle to shoot in. And I said, "Cassandra, no. I had already made the Oblivion films in Romania. I had been to the castles. I had toured them all. There's Castle Dracula and all these other places. But they're either way up on a mountaintop, all disheveled and no electricity and freezing cold and water leaking, or they're so fabulous that they are velvet rope museums that they're not going to let you come and shoot in. And they look too pristine and too pretty for a spooky castle environment. And they're certainly not going to let you, spin cobwebs and make it all spooky." And I said, the Roger Corman didn't shoot in real castles. He shot on sound stages in Hollywood, and the establishing shots are always those great matte paintings, and it's the artifice that we want to embrace to spoof those movies. We don't want to suddenly go shoot them in a real and turn it into something too realistic. And the beauty of going to Romania is that you can have cheaper labor and be able to build sets for nothing. And that's what we did. And so all the castle interiors, the dungeons, everything were all created on sound stages. And we did a few exteriors in Transylvania for like the entrance way to the castle. We shot just the lower part of the church and the door and the gate and where the carriage comes in and everything. But we framed out the upper portion, and in the wide shots, it was all of effect. And anyway, it was so much fun to be able to design. I mean, I designed the Western town for Oblivion and all that, but this was a horror, spoof.
Yeah.
Which is really in my wheelhouse. And to be able to, say, okay, we want a dungeon. I want it to look just like, I want the pit and the pendulum. I want the pendulum. I want the inner workings and the gears. I want it to look just like it did in the Roger Corman movie. And that's what, it was all made to order, and that's what we got. And it was so incredible. I just absolutely loved it. But the other aspect of it was that both Cassandra and I had independently become friends with Vincent Price during his lifetime. And this was our love letter to him. And it just meant the world to us. And we dedicated the film to him. And it was really something special. I write about all of my relationship with Vincent Price in my book, by the way.
Cool.
I started, meeting him at the age of 14, but eventually we became very close friends. I developed a film that I wanted to direct with him that unfortunately never got off the ground. But we met several times, and really I became very, very close friends with him. And it became almost intimate at one point. And but we just there was a really special thing between us. And when I did Guilty as Charged, I really wanted to cast Vincent Price in that because, as I mentioned, it's about a madman who kidnaps murderers and puts them in a dungeon and fries them on an electric chair. It's the perfect Vincent Price role.
Yeah.
But the producer, by then Vincent was getting pretty up there in age. He had just done Edward Scissorhands, where he played a small part in that, rather decrepit. And the producers were also, they just felt, as soon as I brought up Vincent Price, they said, oh, it's going to get wise. The movie is a low budget horror film. And, we want Rod Steiger, and I'm like, okay, well, Vincent probably isn't in the best condition to do it. But when the movie opened, it got reviewed in the Los Angeles Times, and Kevin Thomas said Steiger's performance was reminiscent of Vincent Price in Theater of Blood. Well, that was just about the greatest thing that could ever be said ever by a critic for one of my films. And the phone rang that afternoon, and it was Vincent Price, who had just had seen the review and read it and called me to congratulate me. And I get really emotional with it. I said, Vincent, it's playing at a theater in Westwood. Let me come and pick you up, because they live near there. And I said, let's go see it. And he said, I'm really an invalid now, Sam. I can't go out. But if I get better, I really want to see it. And it just killed me that he couldn't go. I wanted him to see it so bad. And then he wrote me a letter I got a few days later, and he said, it was so great to talk to you on the phone and congratulate you on the great review. And he just went on and on about how he was so proud of it's just really hard to talk about because he ended up passing away not long after that, and it was just the most amazing um, gift to be able to have that final connection with him at the
Yeah.
end. So I'm I am serious when I say that this movie is the love letter to him. I mean, it was really from the heart. And Cassandra too. She absolutely adored him and had become really great friends with him as well.
Wow. That's cool. That obviously you had a relationship for a long time. You knew him for 20
Yeah,
plus years now. Yeah.
over a very very long period of time, and
Yeah.
it was fantastic. Um, and in the book, I photographed some of the letters that he sent me and different things, and it you know, of all the horror royalty, just he was the one that I became the closest to, and it was just a really special relation.
Yeah. No, I just love the fact that you're in this theater in London and he's sitting behind you and recognizes you. Yeah, I know you met him a few times, but there's some people in my neighborhood. We've lived here for 3 years. I don't even know their names, and I've talked to them 10, 20 times.
So crazy. And running into him, it was like one when I was living in New York and my parents came to visit one time. They were staying in the Wyndham Hotel. I go to pick them up. We're going to go to the Plaza Hotel for drinks in the Oak Bar. And we're coming down the elevator at the Wyndham, and the elevator door opens, and walks Vincent Price and his wife, Coral Brown, who had been in Theater of Blood. And again goes, Sam, what are you doing here? And we invited him to come to drinks with us, and they did, and it was incredible. And that was the night that the idea of me developing a film for he and Coral to be in, and they agreed, and we spent the next 2 or 3 years developing it, and it just kills me. It never got off the ground. And then years later, my now husband, Gary, and I ran into Vincent at Bloomingdale's in New York, and we were killing time because we were going to see a new John Borman film at the theater across the street. Oh. And there's Vincent Price, and he goes, Sam, what are you doing here? Go, oh, I'm looking for Christopher Lee. And it turned out that he and Coral were going to the same movie, the same show. You know, I mean, it's just like it's just for all these things to have happened. It just feels like it was some kind of karmic connection that was
Yeah.
off.
How long did your dad own those movie theaters? Like, were your movies ever played in them?
No, he ended up. I guess there was a cross there. We did have a screening of Guilty as Charged,
Oh,
and I
cool.
guess you're right. But most of my other films all with either for time or direct to video or whatever, it didn't they weren't really theatrical. But he ended up selling his theaters around 1980 or so. But
What was the name of them? What was the name of the theaters?
well, the one in Asheville was called the Plaza, which was one of those great big old vaudeville theaters, Art Deco kind of theater from way back that he bought in the 50s. And it was right around the time, how movie theaters in the old days they'd run two movies, a serial, a cartoon, and they would have live acts doing you would pay a dime or something and you'd go in and see like this 4 or 5 hour extravaganza. And up until the time that he bought the theater, television was kind of sucking the life out of the vaudeville live act sort of aspects of these movie theaters, and they just couldn't afford to do it anymore. And when he bought it, he changed it into just a movie theater, just to present movies. And then in 1964, up until then, it was segregated, where all of the just terrible in the South, black people own entrance. They had to sit in the balcony. They had their own um, concession stand. It was just horrific. And in 1964, my dad got enlightened and closed the theater and remodeled it and changed the whole policy to where everything was going to be equal. And he was vilified.
Oh,
Oh
I
my God.
bet.
Death threats. There were, eggs thrown at our house, flashed. It was just a time. But he was, kind of looked upon as like a civil rights advocate and but it was just a strange, very, very awful time in the South. But that theater was, kind of the heart of the town. It was the place to go. And I it's funny where I was just talking to a friend about this the other day. Um, it There was a girl named Lacey Tribble who I kind of grew up with, and we did these children's plays together where it was like a youth, kind of thing where kids would come and do these plays like Jack and the Beanstalk and Wizard of Oz and that stuff. And she was in several of those plays with me. And she remembers going to the Plaza Theater as a teenager and seeing Ken Russell's Women in Love and absolutely getting blown away by that movie. Well, she later married Ken Russell.
Really?
Yes, yes. And just this hotbed of showbiz wannabe kids, me being one of them, and Lacey. There was another gay friend of mine named Jim David who went on to become a major, major stand-up comic, and LGBT plus kind of, all of his act is gay, and he had the number one comedy album on iTunes a couple years ago, and it was number one for months. And all of us were doing those little plays and hanging out at the theater, and but we all were itching to get out of Asheville and get to where the action was.
Now Asheville is like kind of like a hipster.
Yeah, now
There.
it was.
Yeah, now oh no, I know that. Yeah, yeah.
And huge gay community, huge arts community, huge lesbian community. One of the nicknames of the town is the multiple of the world.
No, obviously things like we lived in Portland, Oregon for a few years. I'm in Jersey, so I grew up, but we lived in Portland for a few years, and all the people were telling us like how different it was like 40 years ago, 30 years ago. Like cities can change, but the fact that the way you talk about, like, obviously, like I know the South from like just growing up and history and like schooling and stuff, just hearing about like that your dad's theater had that like segregated bathrooms, and then years later how different a town can be. It's pretty amazing.
It's amazing. It really is amazing. But
now just let's do that to the rest of the South, please.
You need to do that to the rest of the South.
So Sam, this has been great. So obviously you had like, I've talked to so many people that connect with like Hallmark and Lifetime. Like that's such a great, just such a great thing. Either you're shooting in Vancouver or like somewhere beautiful like Utah. But one thing I always like to ask people, especially over your career, like when you were doing the PA and associate producer and with De Palma, did you keep any like mementos over the years from sets, like anybody's wardrobe, scripts, like anything like that?
Yeah, not really. Well, I feel like such a dork because I was such a pack rat about movie posters and stills and all that stuff, and yet I just wasn't even thinking about those kinds of things. It's really crazy, isn't it? It's I don't even keep them on my movies very much. I mean, occasionally I'll have a thing or two, but not much. And we just live in a little condo, and there's not a whole lot of room.
Yeah. No, so maybe you're better off. Like I asked Stuart Penkin that, and he looked over to the right, and he's like, "Doug, there's a closet over there with a stack of scripts." And it just stays there. He goes, I don't do anything with it. And then other people told stories about like John Carter, like some directors, I guess, or companies like give like cool gifts. Like this guy, Peter David, he Peter Jason. He worked with Carpenter a bunch, and he said he gives like the coolest like parting gifts, like a cool leather jacket or things like that. But no, you're right. It's like, what are you gonna do with that stuff?
Yeah, I know.
You know?
It start to pile up, and yeah.
But you're living life. You're enjoying life. That's so cool that you got the movie comes out next Saturday. The Zion.
20th, Saturday the 20th, which I guess is a.
This will be out before then, so I'll make sure to promote it on social media and stuff, and in future episodes that come out before that. And so cool that the trip to Romania. I think that's so awesome that you and Cassandra. It's like going to be like going to like a time capsule. Now, do you know that they kept a lot of those sets? Or are those still some used? Oh, okay.
Definitely not there. I mean, there might be props and things that we had that might be in their archives. I don't know. We'll find out when we get there.
Yeah.
But it's just going to be fun. I think that the locations that we shot in, like the church and everything, I think those are going to be completely untouched. I think they will be as were when we were there. I will be very surprised if they're not, because they're there for hundreds of years.
Yeah. I don't think they knocked them down in between then.
And it's also, it's a national, it's protected or whatever by some national monument or whatever. So it probably hasn't changed at all.
Yeah. Well, Sam, this has been great, man. I'm happy we connected. Love talking to you. I can't wait to read the book, and I'll put a link in the episode notes for people to check it out, because I love your story and I love interviews. So that'll be cool.
Yeah. Cool.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Great talking to you, man.